I do not believe that is the case, at least for the first, 35 verses. It is my understanding that the first 35 verses point to the destruction of Jerusalem, and then he shifts from verse 36 on to the end regarding the second coming. So let's go through our reading review as we begin our lesson together. Number 1, and Jesus said to them, fill in the blanks, and Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. All right, number 2, what did the disciples ask privately after Jesus made this statement? Okay, so 2 or 3 questions, depending on how you divide it up. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? All right, number 3, what types of things would occur, yet, quote, the end is not yet? What things, quote, are the beginning of sorrows?
Many will say that if Christ is saving many, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars.
Okay.
And then nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes. These are the beginning of sorrow.
Okay, so a lot of false Christs, and they will deceive many. You're going to have wars and rumors of wars. You're going to have famines. You're going to have pestilence. You're going to have earthquakes, natural disasters, and yet Jesus says these are the beginning of sorrows. The end is not yet. All right, number 4. Those in Judea were instructed to flee to the mountains when they saw what? The abomination of desolation. That's a very interesting phrase. We will talk about it more in a few moments. Number 5. Now, this is probably worded incorrectly. All right? What 3 conditions would make it more difficult to flee? Probably should be 4 instead of 3. So what do you have?
Those who are pregnant, those babies, fleeing in the winter, and on the Sabbath.
Okay, those are the 4. Pregnancy, nursing, Sabbath, and winter. Okay? I guess when I put this together, I either just read over the nursing part or I included that in with the pregnancy. And I understand it's 2 different things. Okay? But when I edit these, I will make that 4 conditions instead of 3. All right, number 6. Where would the eagles be gathered together? Where the carcass is. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment as well. That's an interesting analogy that Jesus gives. Okay, fill in the blank from verse 35. Blank and blank. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words shall by no means pass away. Question number 8. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Number 9. To whose days did Jesus compare the coming of the Son of Man? The days of Noah. Right, the days of Noah. And then finally, number 10, what will happen to the evil servant? Yeah, there's a lot of, he will cut him into 2 and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right, any questions over the reading review before we get into the discussion? Okay, question number 1 on the discussion side. concerning the spread of the gospel. Chapter 24, verse 14. Was this accomplished by 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem? What scriptures support your answer? Okay, we've got a no, we got a yes, we got another yes. Let's hear it.
Okay.
Robin.
Colossians 1:23. Apostle Paul said, preach to every creature under heaven. That's the gospel. Mark 16:15, the Great Commission. Jesus told the apostles to preach the gospel to every creature. In Acts 2 and verse 5, on the day of Pentecost, without men present from every nation under heaven.
Okay. All right. So Acts chapter 2, the command in Matthew 16, the day of Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, the affirmation of Paul, Colossians 1:23. What else we got?
I've got the spread of the gospel as described in Matthew 24:14. This good news of the kingdom will be preached, and all the inhabitants on earth for a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Was not accomplished by 70 AD. The distinction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD is a separate event, and the gospel continues to be preached to all nations even today. God's saving power in the gospel. Mark 16:15 and 16 preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned.
Okay. All right. So here's how I understand the question that I asked. Matthew 24:14. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. We've got two questions that we need to answer here. Number one, what is all the world? And number two, what is the end? So let's deal with the end first. Matthew 24, verses 4 through 35, deals specifically with the coming destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. In my opinion, we should understand the end in Matthew 24:14 as that event, the end of the Jewish economy. Now, what about all the world? Is Jesus talking about the known world at that time, that is the Roman Empire, or does he mean all the world in a literal sense? As was already mentioned, the apostles were commanded in Mark 16:15 to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Again, is he speaking in hyperbolic terms, or does he literally mean all the world? Robin mentioned Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost. Citizens of many nations came to Jerusalem for that feast. There were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language. Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another, "Look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how is it that we hear each in our own language in which we were born? Parthians and Medes and Elamites and those dwelling in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya adjoining Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of God." In Acts chapter 8, verses 1 and 4, we are told of that great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem. They were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. Then verse 4, therefore those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. The apostle Paul, in writing to the church at Rome, and speaking of the importance of spreading the gospel message, he writes in Romans 10:18, but I say, have they not heard? Yes, indeed. And then he cites Psalm 19:4, their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. A few years later, to the church of Colossae, Colossians chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, Paul affirms that the hope laid up for you in heaven has come to you as it has also in all the world. And then just a few verses later, verse 23, the hope of the gospel was preached to every creature under heaven. Now, I do not deny the possibility of exaggeration or figurative language, a figurative use of this phrase to refer to the known world at that time. But neither do I deny the prospect that God enabled evangelists to traverse the globe, the entire globe, with the gospel truth in the first century. If he can raise one from the dead, then he can send somebody to undiscovered parts of the world in order to spread his gospel and teach his truth. And so I'm not going to deny that it may refer to the entire globe, but it may not. It may just be the Roman world, because that's the mindset of the Jew of the first century, of the people of the first century in that area. The Roman Empire is all the world to them. So, what?
But it's also for Jesus, he was talking about all those under heaven.
Yeah.
And that covers the entire world.
Right.
It's not many of the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Jesus, I think, was talking in a broader sense, but it did their same interpretation at that time as the world, because they knew. Jesus knew from his Father.
Right.
What he had created.
Yeah. I'm not going to limit the power of God.
Right.
You know, if you want to talk about my personal opinion of this later, we can. But we'll just say for the purposes of this class, it could be either the Roman Empire or the entire globe. But we can talk more about it later. But those are some of the verses to consider when we look at that question. Okay? All right, any other comments or questions on number 1? All right, number 2. Matthew 24 is often misused, along with misinterpretations of other scriptures, to support a false doctrine called premillennialism. Why must premillennialism be rejected? I can't have the time either.
It's to believe Jesus will physically return to the earth for 1,000-year reign before the final judgment.
Right.
Problem with Matthew 24 and also Revelation, people take these scriptures as figurative language or symbolism, they take it literally. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, it says, we will meet the Lord in the air in the second coming, which is the judgment. So that tells me that Jesus will never set foot on earth.
Right.
All going to meet in there, whether you're dead or whether you're alive. That's where we'll meet Jesus. So this is all symbolism. There is no 1,000-year reign.
That's right.
Jesus, somewhere in there, it also says that that's the time that the earth will be destroyed.
You know, we're told by Paul in 2 Timothy 2:15 that we must rightly divide the word of truth, or handle aright. If you use the American Standard Version of 1901, handle aright the word of truth. We need to determine whether something is literal or figurative, and we need to keep it within the context that the person said it or wrote it. And that's what a lot of people will do. They'll rip these words out of context and apply it to something Jesus never intended, as well as the words of Paul and the words of John. We need to be very careful with that to make sure that we are not misusing scriptures. Shirley. Yeah, there's a lot of examples of scriptures being taken out of context and applied either to this or to other situations. Absolutely. What are some of the consequences of premillennialism? If you accept that doctrine, what else must you accept? What are some of the resulting beliefs?
Why behave?
I'm sorry?
Why behave?
Why behave?
Why follow the rules?
Yep.
Because you're already predestined.
Well, that's the predestination Calvinism, yeah.
And plus the fact they only think it's like you, under certain rules, and they don't think it's for everyone, or that there's not anything afterlife for them.
Right.
Or heaven, as we know it. So why would you bother?
Yeah.
So to speak?
Yeah.
It's kind of a doom mentality for really preaching.
It is. Absolutely. Yeah. So, like Robin said, the doctrine of premillennialism teaches that Jesus is going to return to the earth and set up a kingdom on the earth, and he's going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years. If this is true, it denies that Christ built his kingdom as he promised in Matthew chapter 16. He set it up. The church was not a hasty, inferior substitute or stopgap measure because he failed in his mission in the first century. The Bible teaches that he is now reigning from the throne of David in heaven. It's not an earthly kingdom. He himself said, as he stood before Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." John 18:36. And so premillennialism says that that never happened, or it didn't happen the way he intended. Number two, it makes both God and Christ false teachers. Hang on. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. It makes both God and Christ false teachers because it was predicted that his kingdom would be set up and it would never fail. And Jesus said in Mark chapter 9 and verse 1 that there were some folks standing there hearing him speak at that very moment that would not die until they saw the kingdom come with power. Do you know anybody that's 2,000 years old today? Christ is a false teacher if that did not happen. Number three, it makes the same mistake that the Jews of Jesus' day made. They expected an earthly kingdom. Again, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Number four, the theory gives people a false hope of a second chance to obey Christ during that supposed 1,000-year reign, that they'll have an opportunity to repent at that time after he returns. Number five, the doctrine misuses biblical prophecy, abuses the book of Revelation by interpreting symbolism in a literal way, and puts doubts in people's minds about fulfilled prophecies. We need to recognize that what God said is true, and He has accomplished everything He said He would, and will continue to accomplish everything that He said He will. The things that have already been fulfilled, we should not seek for further fulfillment. One of the big ones is the land promise to Israel. That was fulfilled during the days of Joshua. We don't need to continue to look for a land promise to be fulfilled. It was fulfilled and then it was forfeited. Okay? So God's quote unquote not on the hook for that anymore. The Jews gave that up. Okay? All right. Anything else on premillennialism?
In Revelation 21:6, is that where they drew that from?
That's a part of it, yeah.
That delivered instead of looking at it from a poetic.
Yeah. Revelation 20 is part of where that 1,000-year reign doctrine comes in. But there's a number of holes that can be poked in that as well because of words that are changed in order to make it fit their doctrine. And it doesn't say what they think it says. All right. Question 3. How do we know that the first part, at least the first part, of Matthew 24 does not deal with the end of the world? I will preface this by saying I know that there are some who think the entire chapter deals with the destruction of Jerusalem all the way to the end. I do believe that it shifts from Jerusalem to the end of the world in verse 36, but there are some who believe it's all destruction of Jerusalem. So that's why I said at least the first part. How do we know it does not deal with the end of the world?
Because he's talking to them at their time.
Yeah.
That is, everything that was there that he's talking about with them was going to happen in their nation.
Exactly.
Their country.
Yeah.
Because he refers to them. He refers to at this time. He refers to, so all of that was talking about them and what they had to look forward to.
Exactly. That's exactly right. What's he say in verse 34? Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Again, I don't know anybody that's 2,000 years old. All right? So it was definitely focused on them. All right? He indicates a number of things that would happen. His disciples needed to watch for deceivers claiming to be Christ, wars, rumors of wars. We talked about most of this already. The natural disasters, tribulations, persecutions. He points to the abomination of desolation and the need for an immediate flight. When that is seen in the holy place, don't even go back to get your clothes. Just run. Jesus again talks about false Christs, false prophets, that they should not be believed, they should not be received. See, I've told you beforehand, verse 25. He talks about the darkening of the sun and the moon, the falling of the stars, the shaking of the powers of heaven. These are phrases used in apocalyptic prophetic language that indicate a shift of power in leadership. Here, he's talking about the Jewish nation. The Jewish leadership is going to be shaken when these things happen. Then, verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. Those things don't refer to the end of the world. As Marcy said, it was for those people, that generation. In Matthew 24:36, he shifts. But of that day and hour. Up to this point, he's talking about those days. Then in verse 36, he says of that day and hour. No one knows. Not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. there will be no signs of the end of the world. It is possible when the disciples asked their questions at the beginning of their conversation that they expected the destruction of Jerusalem to be equal to the end of the world. Because to the Jew, the temple was everything. The nation of Jerusalem was everything. If Jerusalem falls, that's got to signal the end of everything. But Jesus draws a distinction between the two. Those days, verse 29, of the fall of Jerusalem, and that day and hour of the second coming, ushering in the end of the world. So we've got a distinct difference between these two things. Any other comments or questions on this, Rob?
We can see that these conditions were fulfilled for the destruction of Jerusalem. However, these same conditions were fulfilled before the coming of Christ.
Yeah.
The topic mentioned that some prophecies have a dual meaning.
Have a double meaning? Yeah, dual meaning? Yeah.
This may be one.
Yeah, dual fulfillment. Let's wait till we get question 5 before we deal with that.
Okay.
All right? Because it's kind of going to go in with the days of Noah. So we'll wait for just a second on that. Okay. Anything else on this? Mary?
Verse 6, he said, "You'll hear these rumors of wars and these things, and you'll think, but the end is not yet."
Yeah.
He's specific. And
Right.
the end is not yet.
Right. So, we've got two ends that we're looking at here. We've got the end of the Jewish economy. We've got 70 AD. That is one end. But then you've also got the end of the world. And that's, so which end is he referring to yet? I think he may have been saying, look, the end of the world is not yet, but the end of Jerusalem is still coming. Yeah, because there are two distinct things. While the apostles equated the two events, Jesus is trying to pull them apart to help them understand. Shirley?
Well, you have to go back to the beginning of what we were talking about.
Yeah,
Tom showed about the temple,
yeah.
and that's how the story unfolds.
Yeah, look at all these wonderful buildings. Look at how beautiful this is. Not one stone is going to be left on top of another. Yeah, yeah. So the things that he said were shocking, even to his closest followers. They couldn't believe that he had predicted that. All right, anything else? All right, number 4. There we go. What is the abomination of desolation?
Encirclement of the holy city, Jerusalem, by the Roman armies prior to the destruction of Jerusalem.
The circling of the holy city of Jerusalem by the Roman armies just prior to its destruction. Jesus refers back to Daniel. Daniel uses this exact language. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined." It is poured out on the desolate. Chapter 11, Daniel chapter 11, verse 31. "And forces must be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation." And in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 11, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days." When Jesus speaks of the abomination of desolation in chapter 24 and verse 15, the parallel passage, Mark chapter 13, verse 14, where the scripture reads, standing where it ought not. Luke chapter 21, verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is near. The initial prophecy of Daniel referred to incidents that occurred many years before Christ came to this earth. A man by the name of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and Epiphanes is a title similar to Caesar. It means God manifest. It's a title that he took upon himself. This man lived from 215 to 164 BC. He led the Seleucid Empire from 175 until his death in 164. To set up the abomination of desolation refers to December 15th, 168 BC, when an altar devoted to Zeus was erected in the temple. On December 25th, the heathens sacrificed a pig on the altar, and in this way desecrated the temple. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, Jesus used the language of Daniel when he spoke of the destruction of Jerusalem. History gives us even more details about the events that occurred once the army entered the city. During the destruction of the temple by fire, the Roman general Titus entered the holy place of the temple. His soldiers looted its sacred objects and carried them back to Rome. These events are commemorated on the Arch of Titus. In celebration of the victory, the Romans desecrated the Jewish temple by offering a sacrifice to their standards in the outer court. By the time the Romans desecrated the temple, however, it would have been too late for the Christians to flee. The abomination of desolation was fulfilled when those Roman standards and pagan symbols were seen in the holy place where they ought not to be. Matthew chapter 24, verses 27 through 28, also makes reference to the Roman armies in figurative language. Jesus says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Remember, the coming of the Son of Man is his coming in judgment on Jerusalem, not his second coming or final coming. Okay? For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Vespasian and Titus were returning from a campaign in the east against Rome's perennial foes, the Parthians. And on their way back to Rome, they decided to make an end of rebellious Jerusalem. Regarding the carcass and the gathering of the eagles, it seems clear that the Jewish state was the carcass. They rejected the Christ. They were planning at that very moment when Christ spoke these words to murder him. They stood ready to persecute his disciples, even to death. Israel no longer possessed any right to exist as a separate and chosen people. They turned their backs against God's anointed one. It had been forfeited. Judaism was at this time morally dead. The carcass was an appropriate symbol for the nation. What about the eagles? Eagles were the decorations of the Roman standards, under which the veteran legions of Titus gathered to press the siege of the city. So Jesus, in figurative language here, is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman armies, the destruction of the carcass by the eagles gathered together. It's an interesting use of prophetic or figurative language in this case. Any other questions on the abomination of desolation?
Those things you're talking about, the Romans took the eagle and put it on the flags.
Yes. Yeah, their flags, their shields, yeah.
They represented the nation of Israel.
Exactly. It's a representation of the nation. Yeah. All right, last question. How are the days of Noah similar to the coming of the Son of Man? Okay? Yeah. He was told to prepare for it, but not when exactly it was going to happen. Yeah. Yes.
The vast majority of people will have rejected God's word, just as they did in Noah's time.
Yeah.
No awareness of proven disaster or normal pursuits, the manner of living will continue. So in Noah's time, they didn't know that the earth was going to be destroyed by the flood.
Right.
The ignorance of God and His designs for mankind will continue up to the very hour of judgment. The righteous will continue to live in close proximity to the wicked. Then it will occur suddenly, universally, at a time when men will least expect it. So just like Jesus talked about a thief in the night.
Yeah.
You don't know when the thief's coming, you don't know when the judgment is coming. I believe He said that only His Father in heaven knew when that would occur.
Right. That's right. People are going to be carrying on the way they always carried on. Both good and bad. The eating and drinking that Jesus talks about doesn't necessarily refer to sinful activities. It can, but it doesn't have to. It's just a phrase that means they're going on about their normal business from day to day. They're eating, they're drinking, they're marrying, they're giving in marriage. These are things that were happening back in the days of Noah. They had no idea something was coming because they refused to listen to the warnings. Noah warned them about the coming flood. But no one heeded the words of this preacher of righteousness. That's what Peter calls him. 2 Peter 2:5. He built this ark in view of all. They had ample opportunities to come to the truth, but they refused to accept it. Jesus says that those disobedient souls did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. When Jesus comes again, life will be going on normally, just as it was in the days of Noah. Men and women will be going about their usual daily activities. He used these common experiences from the everyday life of Palestine. Jesus spoke of men working in the field and women grinding at the mill. Concerning those two men and the two women, Jesus said that one will be taken and one will be left. That's a different word for taken than what was used where he talks about those who were taken in the flood. Those who were taken in the flood were lost. They were killed. Those who are taken when he comes again are saved. It's a different Greek word there. Just as in the case of Noah and the wicked generation, there are only two categories of people. There are those who are prepared, that is the saved, and there are those who are unprepared, that is lost. The coming of Jesus marks a complete and permanent division between the two. We must be prepared. And we must sound that warning to all those who are around us that they need to be prepared as well. It's not a message of judgment or condemnation. It's a message of warning. Be prepared, because he is coming back. Any other comments or questions? All right, next week, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 26, verses 17 through 56, the Last Supper and the betrayal, the prayer and the betrayal in the garden. If you did not get a paper, they are up here on the front pew. Thank you all for your attention this morning.